Are you a man that God blesses? Welcome to Men's Ministry Monday. We've been going through the book A Few Good Men by Stan Gleason. And the chapter that we're looking at today is a chapter entitled The Man That God Blesses. Now, everybody wants to be blessed. Everybody wants to have the goodness of God flowing in their lives. Everybody wants to see God's wonderful blessings active and operational in their lives. But are you a man that God blesses? Because there is a distinct characteristic of a man that God blesses that Brother Gleason examines in this chapter of his book. First of all, what do we mean by a man that God blesses? We mean a man that has the favor of God on his life, that his endeavors are blessed by God, that the things that he does in faithful obedience to God are having the desired outcome, the outcome that God designed for them. Maybe not the outcome we always desire, but the outcome that God designed for them. Now, I want to be blessed. I think probably you want to be blessed. So what is that distinctive characteristic of a man that God blesses? Well, let's look at one of our favorite friends in the Bible, Abraham. Of course, before he was Abraham, he was Abram. And in Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram and he tells him to come out from the land of his fathers, to leave the place where he's from, and to go to a place that God will show him. God tells Abram that he's going to make him a great nation. He tells him that he's going to bless him. He tells him that the people that bless Abram, God will bless them. The people that curse Abram, God will curse them. And he tells Abram that all the families of the earth will be blessed through him. Wow, what an amazing promise. So God gives Abram this instruction. And what does Abram do? Abram obeys. Abram walks in obedience to God. And God makes a covenant with Abram. And so the covenant, what is a covenant? A covenant is an agreement between two parties. And in a covenant, the greater blesses the lesser. And so God gives makes this covenant with Abram, where God is going to bless Abram as Abram fulfills his responsibility in the covenant. Abram's responsibility is to walk in faithful obedience to God. What God asks him to do, he's going to do it. And so, my friends, it's like this. The man that God blesses is a man that enters into a covenant with God and walks in faithful obedience to that covenant with God. If that's you, God will bless you. So I want to be blessed. So I want to walk in faithful obedience to God in this covenant relationship that I have with him. So as I enter into this, there's a few different aspects that I want to touch on and take a look at. First of all, that God will bless an entire family through the man that he blesses. So if you're a man that God blesses, that blessing doesn't just stay with you, but it flows. It flows to your family. In fact, it doesn't just stop at your family. It flows to the places that you are a part of. It flows to your church. It flows to your workplace. It flows to every aspect of your life. If you are a man that is living in faithful obedience in a covenant relationship with God, there will be blessing that flows from you to those around you, whether they're your family, your wife, your children, whether they're your coworkers, whether they're your friends, whatever the case might be, blessing will flow through you if you are a man that God blesses. And let me tell you something. If you are a man that God blesses, if you're living in faithful obedience in a covenant relationship with God, your children have no idea how blessed they are. They don't know, especially when they're young. They don't understand. They haven't seen or experienced the world. They don't know other people's stories. They don't know the things that people have gone through. And here you are, living in faithful obedience to God. And the blessing of God is flowing in your family. And your children are living in a blessed atmosphere. And they may not even know it. But you're providing it to them as God provides it to you as you walk with him. Now, of course, every generation has to make their own choice. God was the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. But if Isaac had decided to cast aside the covenant that God had entered into with his family, well, he wouldn't have been there. God wouldn't be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, we have an example of Esau. Esau cast aside his birthright for a bowl of lentils. And he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, of course, is Esau's brother. And Jacob receives the blessing of God, enters into that covenant relationship with God, and walks with God. One of the great blessings that God can give you as you walk with him is peace. And so it's really important to remember that as you walk, let that peace flow through your life. Now, you can't always keep the peace, but you can endeavor to be a peacemaker. So bring the blessing of peace. Choose to be a peacemaker when you enter into situations of conflict. Be a peacemaker. Bring the blessing of peace. Now, last but not least, we already mentioned that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One of the things that Brother Gleason brings up so often and expresses such gratitude for in his teaching, in his book, is the fact that he comes from a family that has generation upon generation of faithful people serving the Lord. Of, the generation before and the generation before that were people that walked with God, that lived for him, that walked in covenant relationship with him, that are faithful and obedient to him. Now, he recognizes the fact that that is indeed a blessing, that that's something that not everybody has. And maybe your story doesn't look like that. But Brother Gleason encourages us. So whether your story is a story where, you're walking in faithful obedience with God and there's been generations of your family that have done that, don't let that go. Let that blessing flow from generation to generation. And if you don't have that story in your life, you can start the flow of generational blessing by being a man that God blesses. So let's get into a covenant relationship with God. Let's enter in and serve the Lord and walk with him in faithful obedience. And we will be men that God blesses and that God blesses others through. Let's be the type of man that God blesses.